yeah, so why don't you just introduce, like, I guess you said you want to introduce your background and stuff like
Yeah.
that.
So I grew up knowing I was Okinawan, but not much beyond that. My grandfather was always very adamant of you're not Japanese, we're Okinawan. He'd always like be watching his dramas and pointing out the Okinawan actresses and like she's so pretty because she's Okinawan and very big distinction, but we didn't have much culture going on. So my mom is full, both her parents are full Okinawan, and my grandma was born in Hawaii. She was the eighth daughter of a picture bride. So it was my great grandma who made the hop over. And we do have a lot of family from that side because she's the youngest of eight. And that side I know, but my great grandfather started another family around girl number 5 so that he could get a son. So I've got a bunch of other family I don't know, I've never met. They're somewhere on Oahu, Nakamas. And then on my grandfather's side, that gets a lot trickier. He was born in Okinawa. He was born on the main islands. And unfortunately, he was pretty much on his own starting at about age 4. He and his mom were running to the bomb shelter during the Battle of Okinawa. And unfortunately, they didn't make it in time. And my great-grandmother covered my grandfather and sacrificed herself so that he would live. Unfortunately, he was left all alone at age 4, and he spent the next 6 years scraping together a living in Okinawa. He doesn't really remember much. He vaguely remembered her last name. He always said Za'a, but we think it might be Zaha. I haven't run into anybody with that last name, so I'm not sure. And then it was, rough going. And then eventually the Red Cross got him on a boat and got him to Hawaii. And then he was reunited with his father, who had been imprisoned by both the Japanese and the US during the war. But he did not want to talk about any of it. So my grandfather still didn't learn anything. And there's still no papers. Like, you can't find any of my grandfather's papers. So he doesn't even know when his birthday is. We just celebrate it twice. So we were really detached in that he used to know Uchinoguchi, he used to know Japanese, but when he got to the States, it was not the time to be talking either. So it was just English. And so he forgot all of it. And then my great-grandmother didn't pass any of that down to my grandma either. My grandma grew up just speaking English and didn't even get a recipe handed down. So I grew up with a few Okinawan recipes, but just the more common ones, like adegi or champuru. So again, we didn't grow up we have no family heirlooms, no language. We barely know where anybody's from.
So you folks say champuru, though.
Yeah, that's something I had from time to time.
I don't think we never, I don't even think I knew what champuru was growing up.
Yeah.
We would eat andegi, but that's about it.
It was pretty much just from time to time. My other cousins didn't like it, but, we'd eat it because me and my brother, we knew not to complain about food in front of somebody who starved so much, like my grandpa. So it's just like, you eat whatever is put in front of you. I wish I could learn more recipes, and that's something I've been working with my mom. We have a Okinawa cookbook, and we pick a recipe and we give it a try to just kind of bond and learn a little bit more. But it was still hard of feeling really detached by not having anything, not having the language, just knowing that we weren't Japanese and being told some of the stories from my grandpa and from my grandma about how Japanese people treated Okinawans too, and how it was with a lot of discrimination, a lot of unkindness, especially with how everything happened in the war. And so I knew enough, at least, that we were distinct. I knew enough that we had been taken over.
What kind of stories did you hear about, I guess, how the Okinawans in Hawaii, I guess, you're talking about in Hawaii, right?
Yeah, for my grandma it was in Hawaii, and then for my grandpa it was in Okinawa too. He struggled a lot he remembered a bit of the Japanese soldiers and a lot of cruelty that was happening from them, as well as the US soldiers. And then for my grandmother, it was a lot of being told that you were less than all the time, being told that, being treated like a second class citizen all the time, being treated as if you were just naturally stupid. That was a really big problem for her and her sisters going through the school system. And they were particularly targeted since they had more of an Okinawan look. And then they also had the Okinawan last name. So they were Nakamas and Kanashiros. And that was a big fight for assimilation. I think that's another reason why we didn't get a lot of other culture and language passed down to us, because there was so much discrimination against using or showing any of the culture. So we were really cut off there.
Yeah. Yeah, that's, I found out that my grandma was really involved with like the Okinawan music community, but, and she knew Norman like a long time ago because she would invite all the Okinawan musicians to play at the senior center. But we never heard Sanshin. We never we never heard about anything Okinawan. So it's so surprising to me that, that she was so dedicated to getting all the Okinawan musicians in, but all the grandkids never really heard about anything Okinawan. So it was kind of interesting.
Yeah, we grew up with some music. Like I just came across record that my grandpa had over at his house when I was staying there last year. And I just sent pictures to try and figure out who it is and identifying it. And so Kotaro was kind of helping me track that down. And it was a collection of like folk songs by different artists. So I think he found some digital copies. So that's been really neat to kind of get into. But again, nobody knew how to translate them. And then the rest of my exposure was just through growing up with the Okinawan Festival back when it was held in the park. Growing up, my parents always made us volunteer. So we'd always be like working usually one of the food booths. And then that was the exposure to like music, food, and some of the clothing too, because they had some of like back in the day, they had like the dress up. I think they still do that, but I'm not sure. But that was really it. Yeah, it was like the rest of the year. Like I didn't forget I was Okinawan, but there wasn't really any other practices we did. I grew up in a like agnostic atheist household, so there were no rituals or anything. It was just kind of those culturally Christian traditions like Easter egg hunts or like Christmas trees, things like that. Yeah. Or solar New Year versus Lunar New Year.
Yeah.
Or like growing up with it just being like, oh, that's Chinese New Year, not Lunar New Year. I was like, oh, okay. I didn't really make that switch until I met my husband. He's like, he was Korean. And so he's like, no, it's Lunar New Year. Everybody's got their own different, it's not Chinese. They don't own the Lunar New Year. And that's when I started thinking a little bit more about that too.
So when did I guess your interest in all things Okinawan kind of like, I guess, reignite again?
It kind of just came together piece by piece over the years of my family has always been involved with politics. And so keeping an eye on what was going on in Okinawa, learning more of the history, especially as more of the actual history was becoming more readily available in English too. After it was hard growing up because there was a lot of like the colonized versions of history versus the stories that I was getting from my grandfather. And then finally realizing like, no, what he was saying was true. There was all these atrocities, especially during World War II, everything that happened to Okinawa, and learning more about the current struggle, the ongoing battle really to try and preserve the culture, language. It was something that I really wanted to get more into. It's just the lack of access for the longest time of like, I went away to the States. I went away to Virginia for college. And I went at the time to what was the second most diverse country in the school. Cause I was like, okay, that's going to be a better fit. But then I've got there and everybody just self-segregated and like nobody knew what to do with somebody who was mixed. And then nobody knew what Okinawan was. And a lot of people felt that even though they had no idea what Okinawan was, that they had the right to tell me, you mean Japanese, you mean you're Japanese. And I think that also lit a bit of my fire of having to be this cultural ambassador just because of who I am, and having to fight for this. And I wanted us to not be so lumped in with Japan. And then I also wanted to make things easier for the next generations. Even a decade before I even had my son, I was thinking about that too. What is it going to be like for my kids? And so that was a really big piece of just wanting to tell our story, to get us out there. Even I'm like, I don't speak for Okinawans, but I can tell you we're not Japanese. And I can tell you that, a lot of the assumptions everybody has about us were the result of colonization. It was not by choice. And so I just kept learning what I could while I was on the mainland, but again, having more limited access, but trying to make friends online, trying to get what resources I could, trying to listen to my grandparents' stories, to my auntie's stories, and just piecing together everything from there. So it was just really the work of years and years, and wanting to figure out how that would fit into my day-to-day life too. And that's how I kind of got into my goal with my current, I'm pursuing nursing in psychiatric mental health. And part of that is because I wanted to work on decolonizing a lot of healing that we receive, and working on things like intergenerational trauma, working on all of these traumas that Indigenous people carry. So I've been studying a lot more, not just about Okinawan experiences, but about all sorts of Indigenous and just BIPOC experiences.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I think that intergenerational trauma is really not understood that well, but I think I can definitely see that even in like my own family, this is the way my grandpa was, and this is the way my dad was, and there's a history there. Yeah, yeah. I didn't really understand that for a long time too.
Yeah. Because it's what we think of as normal. It's our normal, and it's unfortunate that trauma is usually the normal for a lot of Indigenous peoples.
Yeah, yeah. So I think that's a good segue. So what brought you into Hajichi, or what brought that onto your radar, I guess?
My grandpa had talked a little bit about it growing up. He did not remember anybody having. The one picture I've seen of his mom, she didn't have. And then I've seen a picture of my grandma's mother, my great grandma, and she did not have, but she was born after the 1899 ban. So I just knew kind of about them. I'd seen pictures of some of the huna that had them, and I knew I really, really wanted them. And I'd heard a lot of different stories growing up, like the common one of, basically tagging ourselves so we wouldn't get kidnapped. And a bunch of different other stories where it was kind of seen as a way of defining that you're Okinawan, but I didn't like the approach, and I still struggle with it sometimes, and the idea that it was something that was ugly or marring in some way, that was some kind of bad thing. But I knew it was something I really wanted, but I didn't want to rush to get them. There was the hesitancy, of course, like being younger and worrying about how that might reflect on my career, because there's some careers where you're going to face a lot more discrimination. It depends on the area that you're in. And then I also did not want to go to just any old tattoo artist. I still have a lot of struggles with the tattoo industry. I mean, even the word tattoo is made up. It's from tatau. And so it's not a word that I like using. It's just I use it the same way we use Okinawan, if it's the word that everybody understands and knows. And there's a lot of cultural appropriation going on across that industry. So I wanted to find somebody who was hopefully Okinawan as well, and somebody who could get closer to the original practices of hand poking versus machine. And I wanted to be sure that it was something that I was getting that was for me, that it wasn't as a way to define myself to others as Okinawan. It was something that I wanted to make sure that I wasn't getting this to prove something to anyone else. It was purely going to be for me. And so it was a lot of reflection and a lot of self-work. And researching what I could to understand symbols, understand what would have been more traditional for my area, and then kind of understanding some of the contemporary context too of how has it changed as it's been like sort of revived. And then I was lucky enough of when I was staying with my grandparents in LA, I came across Chiru, who does hand poke. She's also half. And I reached out to her and I was able to get my right hand started. And it was a really moving process, more than I thought it would be. There's of course the pain that comes with it, but after popping out a kid, like, yeah, you can tolerate a lot more than you think. It was being able to share this intimate cultural feminine space with someone else, to share, for each of us to be sharing our journeys, our feelings, to be healing together. And it was a place I didn't really recognize when I was thinking about it until it became real, as it's a place of healing, and which was kind of weird because it's, you're like poking ink into your skin. And there was a beauty in that really I fell in love with. And I wanted to be able to nurture that space and offer it to others. I had never thought that I would get into practicing Hajichi, to being a Hajicha. I still get anxious about even calling myself one. I think I'll call myself an apprentice till the day I die. But it was because of this space that I was able to give and this healing that I was able to offer my community, and knowing that there's already so few Hajicha out there. And it's already something that's very difficult to access across the states, across the world even, and something that I felt I could do, something that I wanted to do. So I started by working on just a little piece on my thigh to test it out. And then I started working on my left hand. I just finished my left hand about a month ago. And I really enjoyed the process, the mindful process of when I'm doing it on my own, of all of the reflection, all of the care. It's a way of kind of healing some of the intergenerational wounds, as well as the joy of, enjoying these pieces on my hands on the day to day. Like, it's not showing them off for others. It's like a mindfulness piece for myself, kind of almost like a motivational poster in a way. And just bringing things back to myself. I enjoy that my son is growing up, seeing them on my hands, and that's normal. That's what mama's hands look like. Sometimes, he'll ask me, oh, can I match you? And he'll draw it on his hands. And, he's too little to understand all those other complexities, but it's just the idea of that it's normal. So again, working on that intergenerational healing moving forward too, not just for like the adults, but just having that normalized, working against this colonized stigma.
So working with, when you met Chiru, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's interesting. I just stumbled upon her work too, just by accident. And yeah, I really, really like what she's doing.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, she does a lot of nice work.
Yeah.
So when you met with her, what did you folks discuss, and what did you start with, and why did you start with whatever you started with?
Let's see. We started with my fingers. I still need to get my knuckles and my ichichibushi. And I knew I wanted to go a bit bolder.
What is the...
Oh, the ichibushi is the one that would be on the wrist, on the exterior, on the right side. And that's the 5-point star. So mine are going to be more of like the southern Uchina region, because my family, what we do know is that everybody's like more from the Itoman, like Tomigusuku area. And usually you'd see it a bit bolder. And kind of luckily for me, those are the designs that are the most recorded. They are across like the main island. You'll see much more uniform patterns versus as you go out, it tends to vary more. And there's different like theories on how that kind of came to be, because it can vary not just from island to island, but even village to village. And it was great because it's a very, I feel like it's kind of a very indigenous approach where you go and you share your stories, similar to now, of your family history, how you like got into all of your culture, how you found your way to it, what things called to you. And so it was a lot of talking about the different experiences growing up. And So there's the joy in being able to share this, to learn about someone, to share your story. And then there's also the healing that happens together because, we're both grieving on what was lost. And I think that is one of the really big pieces that's important, not just for the diaspora, but for everybody in the community, because there's no one out there in our community who hasn't lost, who isn't grieving. It's just, how are we going to process that? And one of the best ways is to do that together.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily sitting around crying, but that can definitely be a part of it because that's good for you too. But it is recognizing the emotions that you're having a space that you can share about them, because that's very difficult to find in outside spaces. There's a lot of people, even with somebody who wants to, sympathize, still don't quite know and understand. I even face that. Like, my husband's half Korean and they have a lot of the struggle too of, the Japanese occupation. They lost a lot, but he has other things in that, like, the Korean language is still spoken. It's spoken by millions of people. Korean culture is spreading, and half the country is still better than none. And so there's some things that we can connect on, but then there's still those other grief processes. And there's a lot of that sharing that can still happen between me and him, but then having a space within, like, the Luchu community specifically kind of heals its own certain wounds. And then it's, I feel like, a space that we can only hold for each other.
Yeah. So what did you do?
So we started with my fingers and started with the outline and then filling them in. And then we got the back of my hand too.
And what is the meaning of the finger designs in the back of the hand? And
the fingers would be more about, they were sometimes described as arrows or spears. Sometimes they're even described as like bamboo shoots too, and a lot of it, there was the metaphor sometimes used of moving forward. But usually what you would see, I kind of jumped along because, especially with my position in life, because normally you would start off with the 2 dots on your middle and ring finger, and that would be the tontomi, which would be like little mud skipper eyes. And those would be the first pieces that you would usually get when you were younger. And some places I think was as young as 4, but usually between, from what I've seen, usually between like 8 and like 14, about that age. And then you would fill out the rest. You'd be getting all of the other pieces on your fingers and getting the like spears kind of extended when we got married. And so for me, I kind of jumped ahead to that piece because I am a married woman. And then the back of the hand would usually be shellfish. And I'm still learning about some of the more meanings on that ones. Like the knuckles would have been like a certain shellfish, and there's different kind of meanings that I've come across. So I'm still trying to like pinpoint those ones. And again, it can vary. And then the shichibushi that would have been on the wrist that I still need to go get is just kind of your connection to heaven. It would have been a way of just, like kind of like your ticket in, a way for ancestors, Uyufu Fuji, to recognize you as well. And I would love to get my right hand done, but I'm right-handed. So unfortunately, I'm kind of restricted. All I can see about practicing with my left hand. But right now, I'll have to wait and meet another Hajichi. But I think I'm the only one practicing on the Big Island, but if anybody else is out there practicing on the Big Island, let me know.
So what is the typical process? I mean, I know that, like you said, people would get different parts of the hand, or different symbolism, different times. Mm-hmm. Would that typically be done by the same hajicha, or is that sometimes done by different hajicha, or like how does that whole process work?
I think traditionally it would have been done by the same person, because you would have probably been going to your regional artist, whether that would have been somebody in your town or somebody like in that general area. And then again, this completely varies from island to island too. So this is more of the Uchina experience versus the symbols are vastly different, and all, what process would have, like what order they would have been done in can vary. Like somebody who's from Miyako is going to have a lot more different pieces, and they would represent a lot of different things. Like sometimes it would be like symbols of wealth or symbols of skills, like shears, like if you're good at like handling textiles, things like that. So for Uchina, usually you would start with like the 2 dots when you were younger, and then as it's recorded, typically it works from the pinky in, and then you start filling in from there, and then you work your way to the thumb. There are some places, I think I've seen a record where they start with the back of the hand and then they do the fingers. But again, I remembering that a lot of the records that we do have access to were written by foreigners. So and that they only saw a slice, and there was so many things that were probably never written down, and so many things that were probably never shared with these foreigners because of how sacred they are and not wanting our ritual processes stolen and commodified.
So I guess what's next in your journey as a Hajicha?
For me, it's continuing. I don't want to say a side thing because it is, I think, still a core piece of what I want to provide to my community, but it's not like my Western career, I guess is the term you could say. Like, it's not my career. I don't want to be in a shop and work as tattoo artist. It's something that is more personal to me. So it's something I would rather continue to do privately. And it's more about building the relationship with whoever I'm working with than it is about just making a portfolio and getting my name out there. I prefer to be a little bit quieter, a little more private about these things. I think because I treat it kind of with the same like lens as therapy. Where it's just this more intimate process. What happens is between us, and it is a two-way street, but it's just within that kind of circle and whoever else you want to include, because there were a lot of the Hajichi processes where you can include your family and loved ones, but it's still that space that's kind of sacred, and I want to keep holding that. So I'm continuing studying so that I can finish up my nursing degree and use that to help support the process as well as I continue to learn more about counseling, working on decolonizing a lot of Western therapy techniques as well, and offering my community as many, healing methods as I can. So while I wouldn't say that it's like my career, it's definitely a big aspect of what I consider my role to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's it. I think that's a totally different podcast about about all that healing that can occur.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, maybe we can talk about that. We can talk about that later, on the future podcast. So I guess traditionally, when did the girls or women start getting Hajichi, and typically how long did that process last?
From a lot of the records I've seen, usually you'd start hitting around that puberty age. At the very least, have your first ones by then. And then from the records I've seen, it's usually you would be completed by the time you were married. Again, though, it will vary from island to island. I think Miyako, they added on a little bit later too, especially as you're able to pick up other skills. I do know some places when you married into your husband's family, you might be adding on a symbol from his side, but it really varied. But usually you'd be pretty much done by the time you were married. So mid 20s, 30s, you're completely done. And then at 61, that was another big moment of when, at least for Uchina, in the left on the back of the hand, you'd have the circle and it would be expanded. It's kind of hard to describe the shape, but it was to represent the fan, which was attributed to knowledge and just kind of sacredness. And it was a part of the milestone of kind of reaching that age. And there were also records of if you died young, they would do that Hajichi before you were buried too. So I'm still unraveling the full meaning behind that one, but I think it was really interesting. It had that level of importance of we're not going to let you get buried without it either. And yeah, I've seen it as young as 4. I think 10 is pretty common too. But it's just, there's only so much what few records we have, and then grain of salt with all of that too.
Yeah. Are you in touch with any Hajicha back in the motherland?
I've talked to Momoko a little bit. We were part of the little online group on Instagram that's run by Hiromi, who's down in Brazil, Sao Paulo. And they were really helpful in learning a lot more. But we all recognize that there are some like language barriers between us, like, between switching between English and Portuguese and Japanese and Uchinoguchi, and then again recognizing what sources are we looking at. And then but that has been really helpful in just kind of learning a little bit more and sharing things that we would rather not put out in the world to help preserve some of it. And it's hard to kind of find that balance between wanting to share with your community and wanting to protect.
Yeah, what are your thoughts about that? I mean, I'm kind of torn about that topic also,
Oh, yeah.
because so many people, I think, so many Luchuan people are just like really craving, I think, for that information, right?
Yeah.
And it's hard to figure out, like you said, what can be put out into the world versus what needs to be protected. Yeah, it's such a dilemma, I think. Yeah.
I think we have to recognize that a lot of that comes from anger, and that anger is a secondary emotion. It is always caused by something else. And I think in our case, it's grief and fear. And all of that is valid. And I'm not going to tell anybody you're unreasonable. It's completely valid. And I've definitely gone through my own journey of struggling with that. I still do. I think that's going to be a lifelong journey. And it is very difficult to want to share with your community. I have no intention of wanting to withhold or gatekeep or say you aren't Luchu enough. To me, it doesn't matter about blood quantum. It doesn't matter about not speaking the language. It doesn't matter that you haven't been in Okinawa. There's a lot of privilege to be able to do any of those, whether it's access, it's financial, and just looking at other responsibilities that people have in life. And so it's something I really, really want to be able to share. And it's not because of any of those factors that I don't. It's coming from my own fear and grief over seeing so much else commodified, seeing what happened to the rest of like a lot of other indigenous symbols and works in terms of just the tattoo community. I mean, just looking at all of that, how much has been stolen and how much of it has been stripped away, the meaning, the connection, the love, the passion, the history, for the sake of what? For the sake of money, for the sake of being quote unquote cool, this idea of rebellion. And if we're going to attach the idea of rebellion to Hajichi, it's not because I want to look badass or something. It's because it's a rebellion in the form of reclamation, not necessarily just blatant defiance, meaning, so it is really hard of trying to figure out how to walk that line. As well as me, I'm not a big social media person because of all the toxicity and insanity that can happen, as well as just general miscommunication. And that's why I do prefer to take a step back, and I am happy to discuss on a more one-on-one level, or one on however many people you want to bring with you, but just on that more interpersonal level of sharing and connecting and providing a context that I think is very difficult to get, especially in this day of fast-paced, headline-based news. Everybody's just, you can't really get the same effect through scrolling.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think what you said really makes sense, especially about, what were you saying? I think you said, I guess, what do you say? Anger, not being angry just to be angry, but I guess to be angry as a form of, like you said, reclamation, Yeah, so I think, just with the whole Mary Monarch last week too, I was thinking about that. I mean, a lot of people say it's gotten so commercialized and maybe it's lost its meaning a little bit. But also on the positive side, I just see like this entire community coming together to celebrate, celebrate hula, to celebrate Hawaiian language. Yeah, so there's always that balance, I think, between, like you said, commercializing it, versus perpetuating the culture. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think recognizing that, one, analyzing our judgments. Are our judgments that we do have, are they helping or harming ourselves or our community? What is it doing for either of that? And then also to recognize that a lot of judgment can also come with privilege of you have had the privilege of being able to learn these things. You've had, whether it's the language, whether it's the culture, food, etc., and taking a step back, recognizing that privilege and not being ashamed of it. I'm not trying to say you're bad for it or you feel guilty. It's just, I think, looking at it more of what's the best way to use it. Is the best way to use it to pass judgment? Or is it the best way to gently call people in? Not call out, but call in, as to have, again, more of that interpersonal connection. What is going to be more helpful in healing? Because we've already been so divided and so wrecked by conflict. And for so long, a lot of that conflict was not our fault, especially when we're talking about everything we lost and everything we suffered under colonization, everything we still do. And so what can we do, I think, is not nitpick each other. I think, and another part of that too is recognizing that the feelings of anger are natural. It is okay to be angry about things when you see it, because I'm not going to lie, it does happen. A lot of the things like commodification and, the grief and fear that come from seeing those things. And I think it's important to process those feelings in whatever way is best helpful to you, in the same way that it's more constructive to think less about how am I going to go off about this, or how am I going to hold on to this anger, and more about what can I do to help us all move forward? What can I do to help, myself move forward and withstand this? And how can I recognize, how can I recognize both the bad and the good? Because you can still, again, it's not trying to say bad things don't happen. It's just learning how to hold them without having it eat you up inside. And you can look at the good things, not with the intent of trying to overshadow the bad things and say, and like that, putting it on a scale and seeing if it outweighs it, but as a way of working with your healing. That's a totally separate thing. So things like, yes, it can be very heartbreaking in terms of Mary Monarch, in terms of seeing things like commodification, watching the alteration of a very sacred custom. I don't know enough about it, so I won't speak to the details of that one, but I do know that is something that comes up a lot. But also recognizing things like being able to watch and have commentators speaking fluently in Olelo Hawaii too. Like, you have the option of running with both. Like, that is a great new movement in itself, in continuing and recognizing that it is, well, it's not ideal. There is the space to have these discussions about whether or not we don't like it. And also there's the space to be able to figure out this preservation, to keep others engaged. Because yeah, there is a lot that is to be sold in terms of Mary Monarch, but there is a lot where we can still engage, I would say the younger generations, but I think it's everybody too. There's a lot of joy that can still happen. And it's okay to have both the joy and the anger and the grief, because we're not Tinkerbell. We all have more than one emotion at a time. And I think it's just working with how to hold all of that at once. And it's complicated, it's tiring, and I recognize that too. But we got to figure out how to work with that, and recognize our own journeys, everybody else's journeys, because it's not going to get any easier, unfortunately. And the best way that we can work on it's the best way we can work on our intergenerational healing for ourselves, as well as reduce, hopefully, some of the burden for our kids, all the young ones too.
Yeah, especially for the kids, like, my kids too. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think my kids actually, surprisingly, even the 3-year-old kind of understands that she's Okinawan. It's so funny. Because she sees I have some, just Okinawan tattoos, not traditional tattoos, but just motifs.
Yeah.
And she looks at that and says, I want my Okinawan tattoo.
Oh, yeah.
So
It's
it's so
cute.
yeah, it's so funny.
Yeah.
So when she gets over there, we're gonna have to have a deeper discussion with you.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But even right, that moment right there is healing some of the intergenerational
Mhm.
trauma of giving that access that we weren't given, even if it seems like those simple moments and she doesn't quite understand yet. But that just that right there is
Mhm.
beautiful.
Yeah, yeah. So I think that's a good transition to, I think there's a lot of controversy too about Hajichi and who deserves to get Hajichi or who
Mm-hmm.
can get Hajichi. Do you have to be Okinawan? Do you have to speak the language? Do you have to get it from somebody
Mm-hmm.
that's from Okinawa? Can men get Hajichi? There's
Mm-hmm.
so many different thoughts about that. You kind of talked about how you don't really care about blood quantum and
Mm-hmm.
stuff like that. Is there anything else that you want to add, I guess, about that topic?
Going, yeah, it's a big one. Being able to determine or judge who does or doesn't get is something that's really tough because again, just going back that it takes privilege to have a lot of those things that somebody else might determine whether or not you're luchu enough. And as someone who grew up very harshly cut off from a lot of those things, like I don't, as far as I know, I don't have family back there. And so it's extra expensive if I wanted to go. I'm not going to be able to go because I've also have the commitment of having a family here too, access to visas, taking that kind of time, uprooting the family. And I'm doing my best to, learn what Uchinoguchi I can, but I also recognize that I have the fortune to live in Hawaii. So my focus right now is respecting the land I do live on where my family is connected. And my primary focus, honestly, right now is more about learning Olelo Hawaii because it's where am I? It's to me, that's my other cultural commitment. And so I'm not going to judge somebody who can't speak the language, especially not, understanding that I can't. And, I'm not going to be like, okay, you have to tell me exactly why you can't speak it because that's frankly none of my business. Blood quantum, again, doesn't matter to me. I don't really care about the percent. What I do care about is working with someone and discussing with them what their reasons are. Like for me, again, going back of just really reflecting on, is this for you? Because at the end of the day, that's what Hajichi is, at least as I consider it as a Hajicha of you don't get this, getting Hajichi doesn't make you any more or less Okinawan. Like it's so what is it really for? What is this going to do for you moving forward? And I think it is important to discuss that you will, like, while you aren't going to get it to prove to anybody else, you are going to be a bit more of a, you have to be ready to be a bit of a more cultural ambassador because it's something that's just so out there. People are going to ask. And for the most part, it's just people being curious. It's not necessarily people being judgmental, but you have to recognize that is going to be a part of your life. And are you ready for that? And it is okay if you're not ready for that step, thinking about the impacts of it's not right that there's discrimination, but there is. So it's just thinking about things like that. And yeah, it's really the same way I think when we're talking about Hajichi in terms of the trans and non-binary community of, I'm not going to tell you where the line of like womanhood and femininity is drawn. That's not for me to determine. What I'm here is to just support you on understanding where you see that to be. And again, what does this mean for you? And recognizing that it is something that was traditionally practiced more amongst women. And so we're connecting to the history that goes alongside that. Again, not determining whether or not, this makes you a woman or not, but just it was something that was more practice for our foremothers, so we need to be thinking about them. And in terms of men getting Hajichi, again, we only have a few records. Nothing I've seen on the hands in particular, but I have seen, again, like the tridents that were on the arms. I'm not sure if they received the medicinal ones, kind of limited on that, but also recognizing we don't have the records the same way that there's no one who's there's a lot of information out there, but I would struggle to say that there is anybody who's actually an expert anymore, because it's just, we don't know. And I think part of our grieving process is accepting that there are going to be a lot of answers we are never going to be able to get. And so that's why another reason I'm a little bit more flexible on who can get them, and then also what symbols you're looking at getting. Like, some people are a little more rigid on, like, okay, you can only get this if you're from this specific region and in this particular order. But it's again more reflecting on the individual and what are you looking for, what process do you want, and why. So yeah, it's a complex one, but so I wouldn't say I have a flat out answer, other than, for me personally, I will not be giving Hajichi to anyone who is not Okinawan. It doesn't matter if you're only 1%, that's fine by me, but that's kind of where I draw my line. And then, because this isn't my main practice, but
I think you also mentioned, I think previously, that you would consider it for somebody like my partner. She's not Okinawan. Well, I guess she is she is a little bit Okinawan, because when you give birth to a baby, then some of that DNA gets transferred to you. So maybe she is part Okinawan now.
Yeah.
But what are your thoughts about that?
For me, because my time is more limited, I would prefer working on people who do have the blood quantum. And because it is something that we still struggle to make normal within our community. It's not that I want to necessarily restrict this and this is like my hard line in the sand, because no, culturally, if you marry in, you're Okinawan. It's just that because of where we are in like the contemporary context of Hajichi, I would prefer working on somebody with a blood quantum. And so that is kind of where I stand on that one. It's not necessarily that I would say, no, you can't. But if you are somebody who has absolutely no connection, you just think it's pretty, then I would say absolutely not. Because, even if you think it's pretty and you like the meaning, it's because my particular approach is one of intergenerational healing. It's not something I would give, because to me, that's part of the Hajichi, is what healing can I offer? And so that's why I don't think that I can offer that to somebody who married in, even though you're embracing the struggle and the culture and the identity, especially when you have children together, and like, you're going to recognize your kids are going to be going through that. It's more of just, what can I offer you? So I'm not going to say like another Hajisho would be wrong to give those out. Or if there are like other symbols that maybe you don't want on your hand that you can connect to your partner, but it's just because that's my approach. That's my line.
Yeah. I mean, it's really understandable, I think, from what you're saying. Just if you look at Polynesian tattoo, right? And what's happened, with that. And again, in one sense, you have this proliferation of that culture happening, right? And on the other hand, you're just losing that sacredness too. So again, it's that balance. Yeah.
It's that quality versus quantity again. And same way I've been approached by some Hawaiians about asking me to do their pieces. And because I have more of a traditional approach, but unfortunately, because I am not, I haven't studied the symbols, and our hand poking method is different. I'm sorry, I can't. It's more just, it's not like, I think I can offer you something in terms of intergenerational healing, but I think because of my limited knowledge, it's not appropriate for me to do that. But I also recognize the fact that it's harder to find body ink practitioners who have a similar approach, because of, your average tattoo shop is, it's a shop versus, more of a community center. And there is a rarity of practitioners. So I wish I could offer that, but again, unfortunately, I'm never going to know everything, and I'm already doing my best to learn as much about Hajichi as I can.
Yeah. So I guess, we talked, I think, Eric Wada had talked previously about the similarity to like Polynesian tattoo, and I think I sent you some references about the
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 Taiwanese?
Taiwanese
Yeah,
tattoo, you
absolutely.
know. Yeah, what are your thoughts about that? I mean, how similar, how different, and
I think there's a lot of similarities. Even going back to the story of, you know, the myth, the story, however you want to phrase it too, of kind of marking women so we don't get, kidnapped and stolen and sold off. You can see that reflected in different areas. But I think it is something that we probably do share, especially considering how many of these places, including Okinawa, were big trading hubs, and that these traditions go back so far and far beyond what we have records of. And I find it interesting too. I run into a lot of people with, as traditional Filipino, body ink is kind
oh
of
yeah,
coming out more too.
is
And
that have some similarities too?
I think it does. It's something that I've recognized because I will get questions about mine, or I'll see somebody else who's got some, because I'm friends with a lot of like the Filipino club over at HCC, and we talked a bit about that too. And I think there's quite a bit of similarities happening, and it's absolutely possible that a lot of that could have been traded around as well. So I think there's a lot that connects us beyond just being indigenous people, like working through being colonized, of just the same way that art can be shared across, any other form of art can be shared across any kind of music, any kind of food. We'll find similarities happening too. And I think that's
How about
more than
Japan? How about
coincidental.
Japan? Do you see any hand tattoos in Japan?
Not that I'm aware of. Like, I knew they did more face.
Mm-hmm.
Though there were, like, yeah, there's more like the wrist tattoos that sometimes show up, but it's not as much of a thing amongst the ethnic Japanese that I would say, really. And then records wise, but again, I don't read Japanese and I don't have access to a lot of the other histories. It's just a lot of the records that I have had access to are more in reference to Yakuza style, which is still very complex and a very rich and detailed history too. That's produces some amazing work, but with an entirely different cultural context.
Yeah. So I guess, you talked about Eric Shahan's book. Maybe could you talk about other references that you've seen, and the pros and cons of some of those references?
Yeah, so Eric Shahan has the two books. He's got the volume 1 and volume 2. Volume 1 being a collection of papers that have been translated. And again, taking those with a big grain of salt, because there are definitely, aside from just things happening through translations, it's also the fact that the people that were writing about it had a lot of their own stigma and prejudices to work through, like having it referred to as a barbaric practice. And that these papers were predominantly written after the ban of 1899. And then volume 2 is after a book, I believe it was 1962 it came out. And I actually have that copy in Japanese. And I got a little bit of the translations through the other Hajichi online who had been working through it. And then also from Eric as well. And even that, again, it's written so far after the ban and written pretty much from the perspective of an outsider and limited, because just even physically not even be able to reach certain locations. And then again, when you get it into Shahan's hands, the translations were really good. And then there were also some interesting corrections that he made of like, hey, I think they meant this, of like switching up the positioning, like this is how it looks in the book, but I believe this is more of what they're referencing. So I do think that Eric Shahan did a good job of working with what was available. But even in that book, there's just so many gaps, and it's kind of coming back to, we may never know. We can keep looking, and I want to keep looking, but part of it is kind of that acceptance of like, maybe we won't get the answer. And then in terms of in access that other people can really get, the Hajichi group put together by Hiromi on Instagram, that's Hajichiya with 2 A's for the Instagram title. Through there, you can reach a lot of the Hajichi that are on Instagram that have a lot of different information. And then there's Shimanshu Hajichi that's run by Ko, and she does an absolutely great job. And then there's a link in her bio to a website she's working on putting together to help collect some experiences and some more information to share. So I'd highly recommend taking a peek at that. And then if anybody's got experiences, like everybody go out and ask all your relatives, and because you'd be surprised. A lot of people are suddenly hearing from like their 90-something-year-old aunties that like, oh yeah, like grandma had Hajichi. And like, you never said this.
Yeah, exactly.
And like, well, you never asked.
Yeah, my mom just told me like a couple months ago, yeah, my grandma had Hajichi.
Yeah.
Like,
so it's going to be a lot of crowdsourcing too. I think people have more to offer than they think.
Like, do you have pictures?
Right? Yeah. So keep crowdsourcing and then try and like reach out to people like Ko. Moeko is doing a lot of grid stuff at Hajichi_projects. That's her Instagram tag. And I think those are great places to start. Great people that you can reach out to with questions. They're very friendly, very helpful. Moeko is good if you need somebody who speaks Japanese, and then Ko can help with English, and then Hiromi speaks Portuguese for anybody who would like to have somebody speak in Portuguese. And so those are just great resources.
Where's Cole at?
Cole, I believe, is in New York right now.
Oh, New York.
And she's a whirlwind, a total force. Like I don't know if she's still in med school. She's doing her residency right now. She's got a little baby. And she's still pulling all this out. So good job, Ko. Yeah. So I think those are all really good resources. I think the Eric Sheehan books, are great reads and a good place to start. But again, just taking a grain of salt and just kind of remembering that a lot of the perspectives are coming from colonizing viewpoints, and that, records are limited. Mm-hmm. That this is, again, there unfortunately are no experts.
Yeah, that's really unfortunate. Especially, I don't know if if there's any how many elders in the motherland are still doing Hajichi.
Yeah, I haven't really heard of anyone. Mm-hmm. I know that especially after the ban, there were people that were arrested and persecuted for it. There were artists that were arrested and jailed. There were young girls who were arrested and jailed, and they really wanted to crack down, and they cracked down not only on our Hajicha, but also on trying to get rid of positions like the Nuru, which the government position that would have been more connected to femininity and our cultural and social and spiritual practices. And so, yeah, we've lost so much, and we have to keep pushing through. I think remembering that, as well as remembering that allowing this to be an evolving practice, because it was back then as well.
And I think it's unfortunate too that I think in the culture there's there's a humility that I'm not sure if people just are too humble to talk about what they do, mm-hmm. that too. And because when I went to Okinawa recently, I really wanted to learn about native plants. Mm. So I was fortunate. I met somebody at the University of the Ryukyus. Mm-hmm. She's a PhD over there, and she actually took time to take me around and walk in the forest and explain some of the plants. So I was asking her, so what is the definitive Okinawan endemic plant resource? And she was like, there really isn't any, mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. because people don't want to write about it, or so there's
I think it goes back to that saying, the nail that sticks out gets hammered. Mm. And versus America, it's all the squeaky wheel gets the grease, and that's a good thing. But the nail that sticks out gets hammered, and it's another part of that intergenerational trauma that unfortunately we suffer. I think other people might argue that it's because we're more collectivist, and so it's less about the individual and putting ourselves out there. But I think it's because we've been so used to being hammered down, and we have lost just so much because of that. So I think it's just going to continue to be an ongoing struggle. And that's something that's very difficult to get past, especially because we have things like giant national borders. It's not something that you can, if somebody's not going to write about it and post it or share it or make a show or whatever, the only other way is to get there and to ask, but then having the resources and the networking to be able to do that is a whole other thing.
Yeah.
So again, it comes back to that struggle too about what to share and how.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so maybe we can talk a little bit about, I guess, the suppression of Hajichi. You know, you kind of mentioned that a little bit. You know, obviously after the annexation, what was the kind of history, I guess, about the suppression of Hajichi, I guess, over time?
So the official ban was 1899, but there were some smaller movements to kind of oppress Hajichi by just kind of outlawing culture, whether specifically creating laws or to make it more of undesirably in like the social cultural context. And it was a way of forcing assimilation. We've discussed before too about how it was kind of in our nature to want to assimilate as part of that collectivism, as part of that preservation, self-preservation of like assimilate or we die. And that's, you know, I understand that choice. It's a very tough one. And I think that's something that is still really ingrained. Like when we had the visiting Okinawan students and we were able to discuss a lot of topics that were never brought up in Okinawa, and they were honest with us about how they still are going to be able to go back and not being able to talk to anybody about it. And so you can see this lasting damage that's happened that continues to suppress the knowledge, the expansion of our culture. And then at the conference, Moeko had brought up about how she, by getting Hajichi, she then had to give up her dream of being a teacher because she can't be hired. And that's another way that even though Hajichi isn't necessarily banned, it kind of is. Whether, you know, you can't follow your dreams, whether you are going to be treated as less than.
So Moeko is in Okinawa.
Yeah, Moeko is in Okinawa, yeah. And she practices there, and then yeah, she spoke a lot about that kind of struggle too, of having to give up these things that really matter to us. Even in the States, I had to really consider, how is this going to impact my career? And I'm just unfortunate enough to be in a position where I can be picky about my employers and be like, well, if my employer doesn't want me with these, then I don't want to work for them. But that's a huge privilege, and I am not going to judge somebody else for that. So when people are asking for Hajichi pieces that are, you know, on more subtle parts of the body, someplace that can be easily hidden, there's been conflict about that. But I think that's perfectly reasonable, because it goes back to that root of that it is a personal thing. It is not something to be shown off. It is for you at the end of the day. And so I'm okay with that. Yeah.
Yeah. I was thinking about that as well, because traditionally for the women, was it only the hands? But I've seen it on the arms too.
Hands, arms. I have heard some about the inner thigh, but again, that's especially given how private that place is, it's harder to find resources written about it, especially because it would have been written by outsiders. So I think it is one of those things that we can embrace in the current cultural context of, and allowing people to have a special way to connect with their own culture, to preserve themselves and their safety, because I don't think it's reasonable to ask everybody to give up their security in order to connect with their culture. Mm-hmm. And it's just part of the process. I think it's better. It's okay to look at it in the, again, in the anger and the grief, but I think it's better moving forward to consider it more as it may not be a giant leap forward, but a half step forward is still a half step forward. We're not going back. Mm-hmm. Is at the end of the day. That's what that is. Somebody having their Hajichi and having it mean something to them is still moving forward. And it's finding ways to be content and even proud of the small progresses.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think, particularly, well, it's definitely in Okinawa, but even here, right? I mean, mm-hmm. A lot of people might not might feel that they would be judged if they had the Hajichi on their hands and they're showing it,
Yeah, definitely in Hawaii, it's not so bad for the most part. People are curious, and I have people occasionally ask me, or especially at the playground when I take my son, and kids are unfiltered and they love asking me about it. But there's also other times I've definitely gotten some negative feedback, and there was one time I did my best not to get mad, took some deep breaths, but there was one woman who was like, "Oh, you're getting ready for Halloween." I was like, okay, we're all on our own journeys. That
was in Hawaii.
That was in Hawaii. And it's definitely more mainland is the bigger problem for sure. West Coast, less so, but still. And then I would say more discrimination more on like Oahu, to be honest.
Really?
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's just the higher density, so you're just coming across more people, and so it's more likely to happen because of that. And then out here, it's for the most part, yeah, people are pretty chill about it and just more curious.
Yeah, I mean, just thinking back, I think my parents have really changed their mindset in the last few years because, like I said, we didn't really grow up strongly Okinawan. My parents never said, you are Okinawan. They never told me that. So I think even back then, if they had a daughter and their daughter wanted to get Hajichi, I think they would have been pretty judgmental about that.
Yeah, my mom was definitely, it was less about the Hajichi themselves and more about how would I be received.
Exactly.
It was that preservation. She was like, it's, I'm really proud that you want to connect with your community. I'm just worried about things like school and work, all of that other stuff. And then she was also really big on waiting for somebody to do it right. Because there were times when I was young and frustrated and I just was like in my 20s, I'm like, just get it done. I want it so bad. But it was nice to have that patience brought on rather than just the discrimination and that like self-colonizing that happens. And so I am really thankful for that in terms of being able to wait, to get it done in a way that worked best for me. But absolutely, yeah, there's still the stigma. There's a lot of my family is not going to get.
Yeah, what does your family say? Your extended family.
Let's see. My grandma said, what was it? She said, "Oh, I thought they'd be prettier." And I was like, "Thanks, watch." And then some of my other family wants. I have a couple family members that have been asking me to do theirs. It's just a matter of me getting over to the mainland or them coming out here. And then other ones are more worried about pain levels, because I won't lie, the hands are one of the most sensitive places to get like poked, and so it's not the easiest thing in the world, and then especially because it does take time, and there's the healing process as well, understanding that ink is more likely to fall out, so for your Hajichi to fade, especially because we use our hands, they're getting wet all the time, they're exposed to everything, sunlight, soaps, dirt, all that. So they are more likely to fade. So touch-ups are more likely to happen. And happy to do those too. I think it's kind of like, yeah, there's a lot of the ritual that goes into the initial getting it. But from some of the stories that were passed down, the touch-ups were kind of like hitting up the salon, and you get your hair did kind of style, and you catch up with the girls, and which is a great community space, and it has its own kind of sacredness to it. And I love that context too. So it is a commitment in terms of getting that, and it can be very costly. I understand that completely. From the context that I do, and because I recognize too, it's a certain privilege that I have in being able to offer it. I don't charge. I'm just something that I feel like I can offer my community. But I have the privilege of kind of working more intimately. I don't, knowing that this isn't my career and knowing that this is something that I am able to offer, versus I understand completely when if this is your job, this is your day to day, this is how you keep a roof over your head, it's how you feed your kid yourself. There's no judgment in that one. It's just something that I feel like I can give. And so I'm doing my best to while I can. And hope to continue like that for as long as I can. But I guess my like catch is that I'm come at it from such a like an intergenerational, more for like healing space than an aesthetic space. So if you want to work with me, we're gonna be a lot of talking. So yeah.
Yeah, I have some personal questions just about like the male Hajichi. We talked about the trident a little bit, and what other symbolism have you seen? And was that also in the Eric Shahan book, or where did you see this?
I really only have seen the trident in the Shahan books, the translations. I haven't really seen other male pieces. The only one that I might have seen that we were discussing before was the married ones of like when you hold hands, there would be a circle put where your partner's thumb, like right where it would hit. And that's something that I would very much consider doing on people who marry in, like having those kinds of matching pieces, because I think that is part of like the healing process that I can offer. But it's really only like that in the tridents that I've seen. I did see the thing that you sent me about the horse, and I'd love to go learn more about that. So I want to go dive into that some more.
Yeah, I wasn't even sure who that person was.
Yeah, I'm not even sure either. So, and I have to recognize my limitation of not knowing Japanese. I remember some from high school, but I kind of stopped because I didn't want to have to learn another colonizer's language to learn mine. And then right now, my focus being more Olelo Hawaii.
Yeah, I mean, have you seen any Hajichi on males?
I have, and not in contemporary contexts, and not in ways that I would necessarily agree with.
What do you mean contemporary context?
Like there's somebody named Hajichi Kai that does them in Japan, and he puts
Japan.
and he's, as far as I know, he is not Okinawan. And he calls it Neo Hajichi. And he puts our symbols on people who are not Okinawan, including men. And I struggle with that. I really, I do. It's not something that I would start a lawsuit about, but it was something that I would discuss with others if they came to me asking for something similar. Like, I can't offer that. It's, you're going to have to find someone else. I'm not going to write laws about what you can and can't do with your body, because that's a slippery slope, as we've seen. But that is a big struggle to see that. And for me, I'm okay with it when we're talking about in like the trans community, like trans men having it, because it's connecting with another part of themselves and they have that lived experience too. It's, again, I'm not here to draw lines on when you are male, female, or even if that line should exist for a lot of people either. I kind of fall more into the non-binary section too. So that isn't the problem. I think for me, it was more of a problem of seeing it on non-Okinawans, done by a non-Okinawan, than it was gender or sex.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I mean, is there anything else you want to get out there?
I'm happy to work with anybody on the Big Island. Feel free to reach out to me. My email is the best way, because I'm terrible at social media. I do apologize to everybody who may have been trying to track me down through there, but it's just my name, Jill Urei at Gmail. It's the simplest way. And yeah, I'd love to, even if you aren't looking to get Hajichi done, if you just like to talk and share stories, whether you had family members or you had heard about Hajichi, I would just love to hear that all. And if you're curious about the pain, we can do it where I can, because that's fair. That is completely fair. I can get my needles. We can do a little process. I just won't use ink because it does not scar. How we do hand poking, you should never see blood. So it's not there's no scarring in the process. It's just like little pinpricks. And so we can just try without ink. So you can just feel how it is and kind of understand what that might be like for you. Or we could start small and work our way up from there. And it's really just working with each individual and meeting them where they're at.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think we shared a lot of information with people, and like we talked about, I think there's a lot of people in our diaspora and also back in the motherland that just want some of this information, and they don't know where to get it, right?
Yeah.
So.
And I wish I had more to offer, but I recognize, my own constraints. And I hope that we can all keep figuring out how to learn together. Mm-hmm. But definitely, if you can, the Hajichi group on Instagram is a great resource to learn about the other Hajichi. And a lot of them are doing a great work researching and disseminating the information.
Right. Sounds good.
If you loved today's episode, we'd greatly appreciate your support. Please consider making a small donation at donorbox.org/Luchu Nation. Your contribution helps us continue creating great content for you. Ipe Nife Debidu.